If you are a woman, I would love for you to come hang out with Tanya Nichols and I on August 26th at 7 p.m. Central Time for a live meetup to dig deeper into the topic of women, money, and retirement. You can learn more and register at livewithroger.com. Do you want to have the confidence to truly rock retirement? Well, I'm going to show you how on the Retirement Answer Man Show. Hey there, welcome to the show. I'm excited you're here. My name is Roger Whitney. If we haven't met before, I am the host of this show, and this show is dedicated to helping you not just survive retirement, but have the confidence to actually rock retirement. And we do monthly themes on the Retirement Answer Man Show. And this theme for August has been women, money, and retirement. So I've had Tanya Nichols from Align Financial, who works with women near retirement, on the show this entire month. And she's going to be on in just a little bit to continue to hear from women that are looking to rock retirement. It's been wonderful to explore some of the differences between men and women for sure, but really to hear a lady's voice on what they're excited about and what they're concerned about to make sure that that's included because it's such an important topic. Now, although this is the last week of this theme, going forward, I think it helps remind us that although I think last survey we did, I don't know, a year ago, or not even a year ago, there's about 70% men that listen to the show. So that's generally the questions that we get. And we want to make sure we balance that. We want to hear from everybody because whether you're single or married, whether you're male or female, you want to rock retirement and we want to make sure you have the confidence. Now, next week, September, thank goodness, I'm tired of the heat. The theme for the entire month is going to be retirement planning for non-planners, what you need to know. And the purpose of this series is to speak to and with people that aren't geeking out on this stuff. Even if they're capable, they don't have the interest. Perhaps they're not the main manager of the finances in the household, but they still know that it's important that they're a good steward and understand at a high level retirement planning. So we're going to try to do away with all the jargon. And it's a 5-week month. So we have 5 weeks. We're going to focus on the big things that someone needs to know, even if they don't want to be involved in the day-to-day details. So that may be you. It might be a friend of yours, your partner, your spouse. What I need as we develop this series is to hear from you. So if you have a perspective here, you can reply to me in 6 Shot Saturday and ask your question or give me your perspective as a non-financial planner. Or you can ask your question at rogerwhitney.com/ask Roger. Before we get Tanya on the show, I want to remind you about our Rock Retirement Club, which is an online community where you can accomplish 3 really important things. One is it has everything you need to create your retirement plan. It has the education, the tools for you to put a plan together. It has access to myself and the team so you can get help when you get stuck to make sure you get your plan dialed in. And 3, it has a community that's going to allow you to look around the corner to make sure you're not missing anything by having active conversations and hearing discussions with people like you that are a little bit ahead of you on the journey. So if you want to create a plan, you want to get some help, but you're doing this yourself and you want to make sure you don't miss things, I encourage you to check out the Rock Retirement Club at rockretirementclub.com. Tanya, I just had the weirdest question. I don't think I've ever been asked this.
Really? Tell me.
I was in a client meeting with a gentleman and we're on video and he asked me if I knew how to dance.
Is this like an interview question?
No, it was just a random question. He's sort of a goofy, fun guy. So he asked me if I could dance. And I said, no, I can't dance. Well, I can dance, but you might not call it that. But then I amended my answer because I actually am very good dancing, like if I'm in a car seat. If I'm not standing up, I can just I always do that to make my wife laugh when I'm driving. So as long as I'm not standing, I think I look like I got some rhythm, but it may not stand up. Can you dance?
I cannot. I feel that like the ability to move all the body parts in the right way in a coordinated fashion is, I would not say a strength.
We get asked the most odd questions from clients. So the theme of this episode, which is really closing out this series on women, money, and retirement, is how do I put the I in retirement? Now, one thing I guess I want to say first is we're ending this series of just focusing on answering ladies' questions. That doesn't mean that we're not going to continue to do it. We just wanted to give a month to focus here because traditionally everybody talks to the guy, from how we learned to, speak to people in high school and stuff like that. So this is not the end of anything like this. This is going to be just a show for everybody, but we wanted to make sure we had a month here. So when you think of, Tanya, how do I put the I in retirement? What does that even really mean to you?
To me, the I in retirement, and we've been talking a lot about this month, so it fits the theme. It's really about making sure that you find your own voice in the process about where you actually want to be. Like just because your friends all want to be in Florida in the villages or wherever they're at, if you don't find that, if that's not your vibe, really honor that and pay attention to that before you make any big decisions. So the I in retirement, what comes to mind for me first is making sure that you are doing what feels right for you.
I'm always surprised, Tanya, and I'm wondering if you experience this, is when I am sitting with a client, whether it's a married couple or a lady by herself, or even a guy by themselves, and we're thinking about what do we want for the next phase of life? What do they want? It starts off pretty generic. And I've found that I almost have to peel away layers to where I really start to hear some excitement and get them to admit things that they probably were thinking, but they just, I shouldn't say that. I need to be reasonable.
Right. Yes.
Do you experience that?
Absolutely. I do. I think it takes a little while. And sometimes it takes being with someone for a while before they feel like they've got, I don't know, courage seems like a strong word, but have the courage to bring out some desire that they have. Because if they put it out into the world and then it doesn't happen, then that could be a disappointment. But if you don't put it out into the world, if you don't speak to it, then you don't have to be disappointed if it doesn't come to fruition or something like that. But I think that is the most fun part, is really uncovering some of those deep desires that people maybe haven't even given themselves the time or space to think about because they've been busy working or raising family or doing whatever they're doing.
And I've noticed this, and just so I'm sure you may have felt this in your life, but this is one thing I've noticed about you and I, Tanya, because we've had some very deep conversations as we've progressed in our journey together and collaborating much more closely. There have been times when you've asked those questions and it's uncomfortable for me to say what I want. And I know that it's been the same way. So I think it's just the human condition.
Yeah.
It makes me think of, I always go back to these, one of the top regrets at the end of life, according to Bronnie Ware, who wrote a book, is I wish I would have lived a life true to myself and not what other people expected. That's a big regret. And when I hear that, what I think is the unspoken wants, the unspoken needs that we just stuff down to get along. That's sort of what I hear in that.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I think it's good to just sit with that statement for a minute, like what other people expect of us. That is so powerful. Like that is such a powerful driving force for decision making. To be able to set that aside in order to make decisions for yourself is a real skill.
And the first part of that, I wish I would have lived a life true to myself. That's a top regret, which implies that you didn't.
Right. Exactly.
So when I think of putting the I in retirement, I think of a couple different scenarios. And we're speaking to women here, but it really applies to anybody. I was telling you, Tanya, right before we got on, retirement is sort of like going from high school to college or college to your career. You're going into a new world that you haven't figured out yet, but also you get to redefine who you are, right? I was the geeky kid in high school. So when I went to college, I'm like, I can reestablish who I am, right? Nobody knows me except for those few people that went to the same school. So it's like an opportunity to sort of define who you are again. In addition, like going from high school to college, you have a new place to live. You have a new rhythm you have to figure out. You're trying new things that you never got to try before. So it's really a period of discovering who the next version of you is. That's sort of what retirement is, isn't it?
Right. I remember when I moved to Duluth for college and I would just drive. I didn't know anybody there. I specifically went to college to a place where I didn't know anybody. I didn't go with a group of friends or anything because I wanted to remake my world. And I remember driving over the bridge because we're right neighboring to Wisconsin. And I remember thinking, I am driving into a new state right now. And then I remember trying to find the dentist and the grocery stores, and everything was just new. Like my whole universe was just new. So looking at your new next stage with this like wide-eyed curiosity, I think is really critical as a way to put the I in retirement, this curiosity about what's next and who we are in what's next.
And you may not have a clear vision, but it's the journey. And I think the reason you put the I in retirement is, let's say you're a single person and you're working with a planner or you're reading articles to create your own plan. It's very easy, especially if you're working with a planner, is that because they're used to doing things so often. And they've seen so much to say, well, we'll just assume this. We'll just assume this. We'll just assume this. And then you just sort of go along with it, even if it's not the true you, right? Your retirement doesn't have to be 4%. That's all you get to live on. It doesn't have to be 80% of what you spend during your work year. It literally can be a clean slate. And it's easy for a planning process to sort of like school, I guess. They just keep graduating you through the process. And so you got to put the I in and wait a second, that's not who I want to be. This is what I would like to accomplish, whatever you can think of. And then either on your own or if you're working with a planner, their job is to take that into account and help you think through whether it's feasible. And if it's not feasible, how you might be able to get as much of it as you want. I think that's how you put the I in retirement.
Right. I think it's a good example of almost like too many options. It isn't necessarily always like if I heard this phrase somewhere, Google your way to financial security. Like you can't actually Google your way to financial security because the people writing all these articles, they don't know who we are and what we want and where we're at and all of those things. So it is important to kind of shut out the noise sometimes and pay close attention to what it is you actually want.
And then if you're married, and let's say you're married and you're the financial manager, you're the one that sort of runs things, then your part of your duty is to not speak for your partner, right? I know Shauna, and I know exactly what she wants. She doesn't need to be here, right? You can't speak for your partner. It doesn't matter, whether it's the husband and wife or what the partner is. You have to give some space for them to feel safe enough to say the things that they want to say, but they're not saying, either because they're trying to be quote unquote reasonable or whatever the dynamic is.
Right.
And then if you're the non-managing partner, you need to speak up. And I've seen this a lot in planning. I bet you have too, Tanya. I've said this before on the show. I love that all of my meetings with clients are via Zoom. It creates a different dynamic that I can't do in an office, which is when I'm speaking with a couple and we're talking through these things. And usually it's one spouse that's telling what we want. All I'm doing is watching the other spouse and looking at their face. You see a wrinkle of the forehead. You see a grimace. That's a clear sign to see if this is really representing what they want. And you can't do that as easily in the conference room because it's awkward to stare at the person that's not talking. But if you're the spouse that's managing it, or you're in the situation where you're not managing it, if you guys talked about, we're going to move to Florida, and you guys have talked about it for years, and now that you're getting closer, you're like, in your own mind, internally, you're like, well, I don't want to move to Florida. I've changed my mind. It's hard to say that sometimes because you've been talking about it for years. You got to speak up. Because
right.
If you move
That's
to Florida,
why that ongoing conversation and open dialogue is so important. I just had a client call just last week, completely out of the blue. wanting to buy a cabin for her family. And, cabins in Minnesota right now on lakes they're expensive, just like real estate in a lot of areas. And she's typically pretty frugal. Spending money doesn't necessarily feel good to her, I would say. But we've had all these little conversations, as you say, little conversations over a long period of time. So when this thing that felt really big to her came up, she called and said, what if I did this? What would that be like? Could I do this? And how would we do it? And all of a sudden, here we were in a matter of 48 hours, she's buying a cabin because she can absolutely do it. But because we planted those little conversations along the way about what might be possible and trying to create a comfortable spot for her to feel like she could find her voice on this and figure out what she really wanted, then the moment came and she's doing it. And it's so I even get little tingles thinking about it. It's so exciting to see this come to fruition with her or for her and her family and for her to be so jazzed about it. So little conversations on an ongoing basis for people to really uncover what's important to them.
Those are the cool conversations. You know what conversations piss me off?
Which ones?
As you were saying that, because that's a beautiful story. And I've had the conversations that piss me off. And I had one of these about a week ago. It was with someone who was not a client. I forget the context. And essentially they worked with an advisor, and anytime they said they wanted to do something, no, you got to keep working. No, you can't spend that money. That's your retirement. That's money for later. You can't spend that. Like it was a parent to a child.
Oh,
I don't remember if it was a woman or a man.
Yeah, that's really bad failure on our industry's part, because there's a lot of that going on right now.
That could be a spouse.
Oh, true story. True. Yes.
And it could be yourself. Mm-hmm. You could be telling yourself that. And this is the point of trying to get that I in retirement, right? One last thought on this, Tanya, and I'm become more aware of this. I'm curious if you have as well, is when you're planning, you have to have a plan of record to make decisions, right? So it's easy to pigeonhole people what do you want in retirement? Do you want to travel? What's the budget of the travel? What else do you want to do? They may have no clue because they don't know who that person's going to be. And I think it's okay on this to put the I in retirement if you don't know who I is because you haven't walked that journey yet. I think that's totally cool that internally you got to be careful about. And obviously as planners, we got to be careful about. It's sort of like, I'll go back to that high school to college. What's your major? You better choose a major. No, go test things. Test different classes. Go to a frat party, see if that's your scene. Go to, a club. It's the time of experimentation. So I think there needs to be that freedom, whether you're on your own or with a spouse of, hey, I don't know what it is yet, but I don't want to make big decisions until I figure that out, right?
Right. I have a client who is just in from the West Coast. Actually, they have family here, so they're visiting. So they're in the office this week, and she just retired 6 months ago or so. And their experiment is they think they might want to come have a place here. So they're going to rent here periodically, a VRBO or whatever, to come and explore the area. Not that many people move from the West Coast to the northern Minnesota. That's uncommon. But what a great example of I had biases about, everybody wants to go to Florida or Texas or the South. Well, they want to come to the Midwest. So, okay, how do we make that happen? So I think it's fun to watch people explore whatever the I is going to be because they don't really know. And it is a journey. And they're feeling a little rushed because of real estate prices. But we're just saying, hey, it's an exploration. If it costs you a little more in a year, who cares? But wrong real estate purchase.
Much more expensive.
Is expensive.
Make sure they test it out in February, though.
Right.
Or have a summer home. So the point here is don't have that regret. Live a life true to yourself. Speak up so you don't live by somebody else's version of your dream. With that, let's move on and answer some listener questions. All right, and we're off to answer some of your questions. Now, first off, I have a question for you. This comes from a client, Tanya. I have a question for you out there. I have a client who's retiring within 6 months, and I was meeting with the husband and wife, and she was asking, what suggestions do you have for things we should be doing within 6 months of actually retirement? And they're already dialed in financially. We got that part down. But some suggestions I had is open up a HELOC, take care of a lot of the dental stuff, take care of a lot of the healthcare stuff while you have corporate insurance, etc. But I promised her I would ask on the show. So if you have an idea of what somebody should do within 6 months of retirement that is a little bit out of the ordinary, go to rogerwhitney.com/Ask Roger, or you can reply to our 6-Shot Saturday email. And I promised her I would ask and share those suggestions, and maybe I'll share them on the show.
Fun.
There are a lot of things like logging into accounts. A lot of people do that with their work email. Well, that work email is going to go away.
Oh, that's a good one.
Things you wouldn't think about. But I promised her I would ask that. Okay, our first question. Are you ready, Tanya?
Ready.
Because this one's for you. I would like Tanya's best list of references, websites, books, videos, checklists written to guide a new widow who is suddenly thrust into making impactful financial decisions that can manage without immediately spending money on professionals that she may not be able to afford. The old cliche of never making important, irrevocable decisions within a year is not always practical. Some things have to be made, especially right after a husband's death. So this is from Shannon. And so do you have any resources for Shannon?
I do. And I think she's probably right. I mean, there are obviously decisions you have to make right away. But I think some of the big ones that you are okay to hold off on, like selling your real estate or making a big move, some of those things I think are still really practical ideas. If you are still working, maybe not changing and retiring right away, some of those things, keeping your community as much of the same as you can, keeping your home life, your environment as much of the same as you can. Because yes, there are going to be some money decisions that have to be made that might change things. But as far as references, I did a little crowdsourcing for Shannon's question. And there's a couple books I thought were interesting. And I think Suddenly Single is a book and workshop series that has high marks. And then another book is Moving Forward on Your Own by Kathleen Rail, Rehl. I suppose you'll put links somewhere, And then Joy Kirsch is another advisor. I think she may or may not be retired now. She's got a checklist for survivors, which I thought was really spot on. And she even has a phrasing, grief to growth, which I thought was really interesting. And so she's got kind of a process. Their firm has a process to take widows through. And the checklist kind of goes through the different stages of, I don't want to call it planning, but different stages of adjusting to your new life with money and personal and all the things that go along with a huge life change like that. So those are a couple that came from
I actually know Joy. She's actually local. I've known her for a number of years. Yeah.
Okay.
So we will share that checklist in 6-Shot Saturday, which is our weekly email that we send out with a summary of the show and quick tips on things to read and check out so you can rock retirement. You can sign up for that at rogerwhitney.com. All the way to the bottom, we actually have a new website, so you can check it out. Our next question is from Colleen. Women in beginning retirement age now can end up statistically with heavy caregiver duties, including aging parents, aging spouses and partners, and children and grandchildren. Is there a way to balance this load with the combined financial resources or assistance which may be available while protecting your own health and finances and rocking retirement at the same time? My first thought was, Colleen, wow, that's a big question. How do you balance all of that? That's why I'm being quiet so Tanya can have a brilliant answer.
You know what? My first thought was, you know what? A really great therapist. I mean, doesn't have anything to do with money, but holy smokes, that is a big question. And it's real life for a lot of people. So I think, the point is a good support network is really the key fact. And then I think last week we talked a little bit about, or maybe it was a few weeks ago, like
it all goes together. It's okay.
Making sure that you understand what's needed for your own life and you put on your oxygen mask first. So you take care of yourself first, financially and otherwise. And then you start to look at, all right, if there's a kid who needs extra support or a parent who needs extra support, what are your boundaries and how are you willing to engage in support of them financially, time, energy, etc.? Because once you start, it's really hard to stop that. And some kids and parents will have resources. Like we sometimes come in with that rescuing thing that we talked about. We come in with the rescuing thing and then we find out, well, maybe that kid could have been eligible for MNsure, or excuse me, not MNsure. The healthcare exchange in Minnesota, it's called MNsure. Maybe they would have been eligible for some tax credits for health insurance. And so we didn't need to come in and write the check for the health insurance premium every month. So there are resources for people who are in circumstances that can't take care of things. It's just a balance for you of put your own oxygen mask on first. That's my tip for Colleen, and have a good therapy.
Brilliant. My thoughts are along the same line. And we've talked about this, I know offline, but likely on the show as well. When you're raising kids, and in general with friends and everyone else, you can't rob people of their own problems, right? Because and as a parent, it's so hard not to, right? I'm just going to make it all better. And so there has to be an element of that for sure, right? People need to deal with their own problems, otherwise they're never going to grow. But then you do have situations where literally they can't help themselves. Take an aging parent that can't help themselves. And along the lines of what you were saying, Tanya, and I have not personally had to deal with this. I've dealt with it with clients, but not in my own life, being the navigator rather than the rescuer, right? So let's take a parent as an example. Let's assume all their money is gone and they need a place to live. They need healthcare organizations. Maybe they need long-term care. There are safety nets in place, right? They have Social Security, they have Medicare, obviously, and then they have Medicaid and navigating all of that. And to whatever extent you can, fill in the gaps without taking your oxygen mask off. And likely in some situations, there are no perfect answers. Somebody is going to suffer or not be in what you would prefer, either whether it's for yourself or your children or your grandchildren. But you got to protect yourself first.
Right.
Financially, but also emotionally.
And I have had experience with this personally with family members that were not able to take care of themselves for a period of time. And I will say my work in that process was getting comfortable with the discomfort in their situation and recognizing like this is where they are at and how far am I willing to bring myself into that situation, time, money, energy. And it's a hard thing. So that's why the joke about the therapist is not just a joke. I think that can be a real good tool when you're dealing with other people's suffering because it's a big weight.
Yeah, there is one resource I'll mention. Naomi Karp from the Stanford Longevity Center was on, I forget when, a month or two ago. She's actually going to come into the Rock Retirement Club as a special guest. But the Stanford Longevity Center partnered, and I can't remember the other partners right now, but some really important thinkers with a lot of experience. www.thinkingaheadroadmap.org talks a little bit about this, thinking ahead on some of these issues. Now, our next question is related, and it comes in the form of an audio question, which is one of our favorite.
Hi, Roger. This is Audrey. I listened to your podcast and wish I would have started listening to it earlier. I'm a retired 67-year-old woman, and I have two retired brothers. And by far, my biggest retirement concern is how to arrive at a workable and equitable way to care for our 93-year-old parents, both of whom have dementia. My brothers are wealthier than I am, but they refuse to sit down to discuss openly how we should divvy up responsibilities. My father's long-term care expenses have already drained half of my parents' assets in less than 6 months, and my contributions have now eaten into my quote-unquote minimum dignity floor. And that's what I've been living off of until I can claim my own Social Security benefits in 2024 at age 70. What I wanted to know is if there's any kind of formula for parental support that's similar to the formulas like the Melson formula used for child support that could provide a guideline for how much each sibling should contribute financially.
Aubrey, thanks for the question. There is no formula for what you're talking about. In my experience, I have seen the children chipping in different ways. They live with one of them for a while, and then the other one helps pay financials and the parents rotate. I've seen all sorts of cooperation to take care of our family, right? It doesn't sound like your brothers are in that position to want to do any of that. I mean, just from your statement, which is really sad and makes me a little mad, actually. I don't know how to bring them to the table because even if you had the perfect formula, it doesn't sound like they're willing to engage in having that discussion anyway. What I would say is sort of what we talked about before. Take care of yourself and help navigate for your parents. If they have dementia and if they qualify for Medicaid, there are facilities that coordinate with Medicaid and they may not be perfect. And sort of what you were talking about, Tanya, it may be a little painful, but you have to make sure you're okay in the process and you don't commit financial suicide for them because I doubt that they would want that. And then in terms of how do you bring about your brothers to being adults, that's a much bigger topic that I think I'm prepared to handle. You have any thoughts on that, Tanya? I hate these kind of questions because it's so hard.
It's a hard spot. And similar to Colleen's question, Colleen was assuming that women end up with heavy caregiver roles, which statistically is probably true. Aubrey is saying, well, we have these expenses. Obviously, my brothers and I should be paying for this to help my parents. Like, that's obvious. But I think that is where we want to step back from that and say, well, if the brothers don't necessarily agree with that for whatever reason, and it reminds me of like kids, like how we all have different views of how, even in your own marriage, raising children, as they come into adulthood, I've got plenty of clients who mom or dad is helping kid one on the side, not telling the other spouse about it because it's a conflict. Because one spouse thinks that the spouse or the kid should be doing XYZ on their own, and they're not yet, but the other spouse doesn't want them to suffer, so they're helping them because they need a leg up. Everybody's version of that reality is so different. And especially in a parental role, everybody has complicated relationships with their parents. So just to assume that one sibling would feel a sense of responsibility to care for the parent may not necessarily be true. I'm not saying that's right or wrong, but it's just the facts in many, many families. And so it just tells me that stepping back and asking ourselves, is this the role that we want to play? Do we want to be the navigator or the rescuer? Do we want to take on this responsibility, even if it's clear that other people won't?
That's really well said. Along the lines of what Tanya's saying is, I think it's important that you have to come to a decision and a well-defined boundary. This is what I'm willing to do for my parents. That could be sacrificing all of your finances and just living off your Social Security. You can make that decision. The key is to have some clarity for yourself and make the decision so you can come to peace with it, so you don't let it poison you rocking life in whatever form you're able to. It's when you don't have a decision of wanting these brothers to do the chip in. It's when you constantly want them to do it and you have resentment about that. And then you constantly go back and forth and feel like you're just having death by 1,000 cuts. That's when you really zap your passion with life. But if you make a decision, I am going to do this, then even though it still might be painful, it's not optimal, you can feel confident that you're not waffling. And I wish you the best.
Good luck, Aubrey.
Our next question is from Jack. Oh my goodness, I allowed a guy in here. Jack says, my wife wants to hear the most basic versions of these topics. As soon as financial lingo comes up, she's lost and tunes out. Then I actually had an email from Tina, says her husband is exactly the same way. When you start to bring up any kind of lingo, they like, this is, it's like the teacher in the Peanuts. So Tina and Jack, the theme for all of next month is retirement planning basics, what you need to know. So we're going to spend the entire month trying not to use lingo and explain the big rocks, the core things that a non-financial person needs to know and how they can retain some agency in this area without having to go down the rabbit hole. So we're going to keep it very basic. And honestly, I think it will be helpful for the people that aren't financially savvy. But be honest with you, Tanya, it's going to be helpful for the people that are way too financially savvy because they get way too far down in the weeds most of the time.
Oh, yes. Yep.
And so as we prepare this series, feel free to email me, obviously through 6shotsaturday, or go to rogerwhitney.com/Ask Roger and tell me what you want to know in very simple, plain terms. So we're going to make that a month-long focus. And I think it's a 5-week month. So we got a lot of basic stuff to cover. All right, Tanya.
The trick will be for the basics one, you'll have to keep the episodes really short, right? Bite size. That'll be the secret.
Each one bite size. It's harder than you think. I'll probably really abuse analogies and metaphors. I'm going to abuse those things next month.
You're good at those.
Yeah, I'm good at abusing them for sure. So Sue is asking about one of the worst things financially that I think can happen to a woman or a man, which is obviously an unexpected divorce. But you couple that with later in life, it can be financially devastating. If you're going to get divorced, if it has to happen, do it earlier. Don't do it right at retirement. But her question is, could you discuss unexpected divorce in retirement? What is divided? How to recover financially?
I'll start since I've been divorced, but I do think I'll put the disclaimer that I think each state's a bit different based on their own laws.
Correct.
Minnesota is it's not community property. It's the opposite of that. What do we call that? Do you remember? Is Texas?
Texas is a community property.
Okay. Minnesota is not a community property state. So in a non-community property state like Minnesota, what happens if you unexpectedly divorce in retirement is you take all the sum of your assets and you basically divide them down the middle. And then each person gets theirs. And then they'll take a look at the income if one has more pension and Social Security than the other. But my understanding is they'll just try to equalize that as much as possible, because at that point, there's no more earned income. So the big argument about what each party is entitled to, it's just a little bit simpler because you've already accumulated everything that you're going to accumulate. So that's my limited understanding. I'm no divorce attorney, but what's yours?
Yeah, we're definitely not giving you legal advice because this is state by state and there's a lot of situations that can happen. Mine is from having navigated divorce, not personally, knock on wood, love you, honey, but with clients, some very amicable, some very nasty, is rule number one, I would say, Sue, is regardless of the other partner and where their mental state is, be friendly always, but be adversarial. Don't sacrifice what you are owed, what you are entitled to by being friendly. That's where I've seen people go really wrong. And usually it's been the wife, is they're trying to be nice and they're sacrificing and saying okay to things, not realizing that it's an adversarial process. Yes, there are formulas based on the state. Those formulas don't have to be followed. And in negotiation, and I'm not an expert negotiator, but I was reading a book and it says there are two types of negotiations. There's a win-win and there's a win-lose. And if you're playing win-win and the other person is playing win-lose, you have to switch to win-lose or you're going to get taken.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think the number one rule is you have to get representation and let that person actually represent you. So you extract yourself from the process because they've navigated this and they're going to help you get what you're entitled to and protect you from yourself. Tanya and I always laugh internally because we have to protect ourselves from talking to potential clients, because if we talk to them, everybody we end up talking to is so nice and wonderful. We want to work with them. And we end up sacrificing ourselves unintentionally. So we've built systems to protect ourselves from that so we can serve the clients that we've made promises to. And this is sort of the same way. You got to protect yourself from yourself.
Right.
That would be big time rule number one.
Can I play devil's advocate?
Yeah, of course.
So another thing I've seen happen is, like, I agree with you totally on not sacrificing your own future security, especially in order, like, hoping that they'll be nice to you later or something. Like, in that agreement, in that legal agreement, it really governs all. So you want to make sure that you have good advocacy for you in the form of solid representation and from an attorney. But I've also seen some, in this case, it was a woman, and her desire was to be done. She didn't want a big, long, drawn-out process. And she could have received a lot more in the process had she fought longer and made it adversarial. Instead, she just asked for enough as though, and she was middle-aged. And so she just asked for enough as though she had been a working mom or a working woman instead of a stay-at-home mom, so that she had enough in her retirement accounts, enough in her, savings, enough equity in the home as though she was a working person that whole time that they were married. And they were able to get it done in 90 days in a situation that was pretty complicated. But for her, she was very clear about her priorities. She could not have it last any 1 minute longer in her mind because it was just zapping her. So I don't know if that's exactly devil's advocate, but if you're in retirement, not in the middle, wherever you're at in this whole space, you could decide to let go of some of the financial side of things because you just want to be out and moved on into the I, right? If you're going to develop your next I in retirement, you just want to be in that next stage, figuring that journey out rather than in the stuckness of divorce. And the stuckness of divorce is really hard for a lot of people.
Thank you so much for bringing that perspective. You're exactly right, as usual.
Well, both are right.
No, I think we both are for sure. I was thinking from a protection standpoint because of some things that I've seen.
Right.
But you make a really good point. I remember I actually have gotten divorced professionally. I had 2 business partners and I had to navigate.
That's bad too.
Yeah, that was a 15-year marriage in business and it was a beautiful marriage. And it was amicable. And I remember, that's one of the things I'm actually most proud of, is that we still like each other after that process, which is no easy trick.
Mm-mm.
But what you were saying, it made me think of this is financially, I gave up more than I should have because I was so excited. I knew I'm not going to argue over pennies when I know that this is where I'm going. And so I was exactly what you talked about, Tanya. It was, I don't want to quibble over that. Fine. I'm not going to give you everything, but I want to get going over here. And I think part of this comes into, Tanya, one of the premises is that this particular person had some framework of what they needed and what they wanted and where they wanted to go, because then they weren't just lost. They had a vision for where they were going next already.
Right.
Right.
Sue's question on the unexpected nature of it, I think. She asked about how do you recover financially from that? I think having, again, similar to being widowed, that's often unexpected as well. It's like this, having a solid support network around you. And if you are the type of person that's going to work with a professional, making sure you're getting solid financial advice. And it's a process. Buying real estate, all that stuff. If you've got a good, solid community and potentially a professional to help you think through some of those decisions, that could make a big difference on how fast you recover financially and otherwise.
Yeah, and that process has no time frame. Some people take years, some people take 3 months. I have a very horrible acronym for how to recover. It's GAA, G-A-A. I need a better one. Grieve. Grieve for the loss. It is a loss, a big loss, unexpected or otherwise. And you got to understand that. And then as you're grieving and as you get through that, assess, okay, where am I at now? And what are my options? And then act, right? I think of it, I've done some whitewater raft trips, many of them. And I recall one big river, the Gully in West Virginia, which is one of the biggest ones. And I got thrown from the boat and I went through GA very quickly. I was like, oh crap, I'm in the water. This sucks. And then I assessed. Nothing's broken. Where am I? And then I acted. I swam to the shore. That's a very simple analogy of sort of what you have to do when you're thrown off the boat. I need a better acronym though. God doesn't make it.
Good message though. I like that.
So why don't we switch and go set a SMART sprint?
On your marks, get set.
And we're off. Set a little baby step you can take in the next 7 days, not just to rock retirement, but rock life. In the next 7 days, how are you going to be brave enough to put the I in retirement? How are you going to be brave enough to speak up to your true self? That's a big question. Maybe you need to enlist a friend to talk about it with, a trusted confidant. Maybe it's a therapist. Maybe it's a journal. I found that good friends are great for stuff like this because it's hard to be brave. It really is hard to be brave, even if everybody thinks you are brave, right? I have Tanya here. I'm struggling with being brave of saying no to accepting a client because I don't want any more clients. I am too busy. And when I get in the situation, I'm not that brave because I like them. They're nice. I want to say yes. And so Tanya is coaching me through, and actually she's shaming me through that if I accept this client, I'm going to have to do 100 burpees and video it and put it on Twitter. Well, I did 33 burpees the other day and I almost threw up. But Tanya, as a really good friend, is helping me be brave. So
because you want to golf with Shauna.
Oh, because I have things that I want to say yes to.
Yes.
Right. And I don't want to sacrifice that based on somebody else's expectation of me.
That's how I used to do quite a bit of pro bono work. And then at some point, I made the decision that, and I was involved in some coaching groups, and I made the decision that every yes I said to a pro bono call was a no that I said to Grace, my now almost 14-year-old daughter. And at this really intense child rearing time with my kids at school age, it's just one of the areas that I've shifted from. I still do some like volunteer work with some boards, but the specific financial advice pro bono work, I don't do that unless I just really don't do that. And I did the same thing. For every yes I say to them, I am saying no to Grace. So it works.
So the question for you, my dear friend, is start this journey to make sure that you put the I in retirement and you're brave enough to speak up. As Tanya doesn't realize that we're always recording at the end.
I forget that every time.
Every single time. Every single time. So we are done with our series. Now, you'll be on the show a lot. Any thoughts on women, money, and retirement and how we did? Because we were nervous going into this for some reason. I think we made it bigger than we thought.
Well, I loved that we answered women's questions. I would love to hear what the women thought. If there's stuff they want us to cover next time, we do some version of this.
Yeah, in fact, tomorrow we have over 200 women live. And literally, we're just going to talk and answer questions and share perspectives. So it's just really hanging out. I'll be the one oddball.
So that is going to be so much fun.
Oh, yeah, it's going to be great. It's going to be great. And we will continue, obviously, to answer everyone's questions so we can help us all rock retirement. Have a great week. Hey, it's time for that all-important disclaimer. We so appreciate you listening to the show and love your questions and love the teaching that we're able to provide here. And actually, it helps us too. But remember, you're not our clients.
Not love it if you took advice from us on the show.
We would not love it if you took advice from us on the show. Realize this is helpful in education. Talk to your legal advisor, your tax advisor, or your financial advisor before you make any decisions.
We appreciate you joining us today for this episode of Retirement Answer Man. Be sure to visit rogerwhitney.com/answers to access the Retirement Answer Library with over 30 checklists to help you make the most of the only life you have. Remember, you have more power than you realize to create an amazing life starting today with Retirement Answer Man. The opinions voiced in this material are for general information only and are not intended to provide specific advice or recommendations for any individual. All performance referenced is historical and no guarantee of future results. All indices are unmanaged and may not be invested into directly. Have a wonderful day.